Most sexual encounters are not a meeting with the other. They're a meeting with our own sexual energy bumping up against another human body.
Yeah, maybe we move on. I mean,
I talk a little bit about the sexuality piece, because it is such a sexual, there is so much wrapped up around Tantra and sex in our modern paradigm. The animal takes over. Yeah, and we love the animal. I'm not about trying to destroy the animal, but it's like, how can I?
No, she's not.
No, far from it. Yeah, and then there's a moment of stillness, or 15 minutes of stillness, where you freeze.
With your arms still up.
With your arms still up in the air. Yes, this is true. And in this, you're cultivating the witness to watch, because by this time, there are many emotions have come up.
Hello, everybody. So, I just came out of a 3-week retreat called the Tantric Way, and whenever I spoke to people before going into this retreat, there was a lot of curiosity, and I said, yeah, I'm gonna make a video about it. And I tried a few times, but it was so difficult to sum up all the stuff that we were doing in a video that I decided to get the facilitator of the seminar, Gaia Ma, to sit next to me and talk to me a bit about what we were actually doing there.
Okay.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Moritz. It's good to be here.
So, let's start with the question, what is Tantra? Because there's a lot of curiosity around this, and I myself had a hard time answering this question.
Okay. Well, Tantra is a word, really, that has been used in many, many ways throughout the history of many cultures. It's been used in the Buddhist tradition, it's been used in the Hindu tradition, and now in the modern paradigm it's used in another way. Mostly what you find in the modern paradigm is that Tantra has everything to do with sex. And this is a misunderstanding, because the old Tantric philosophies were about no longer only ascending the body, but bringing spiritual practice back into the body. And Tantra is about this union between energy and consciousness. And for us to be here as humans, there has to be this energy and consciousness, this lovemaking between them. And many of us are divided. We're either more in the body or more in spirit. And this idea that there's a lovemaking between energy and consciousness is what makes Tantra today often just about sex.
Yeah, it feels like that, because when I mention Tantra to people, that's the connection they have, that's where the curiosity then lies, and actually it's not just that.
Not at all. No, it's about really living your human life in a connection to spirit and building this bridge. The lovemaking is between you and your God self, or you and your goddess self. And the metaphor of making love is a metaphor that we can use as a practice. It's tantric practices are some of the only ancient practices that involved any kind of sexual contact, and this created also the misconception that it was all about sex, because we live in a sexually repressed and obsessed society. So if there's even a tiny bit of sex in something, of course we're gonna, and the marketing channels want to blow that up and make it all about sex. But ultimately Tantra is about living a spiritual life in the body.
Yeah,
and really most new age kind of practices are very tantric. Asana yoga is a tantric practice. It's about bringing our awareness to our bodies. So there we have the awareness and the energy coming together.
Okay, and then the Tantric path, the Tantric Way, the program that you put together for our group. Just to give a few facts on the side, it was 3 weeks in an ashram here on the beautiful Lake Atitlan. Maybe you can see the volcano in the background. So there we were with 17 people for 3 weeks in the ashram, and you put together a program consisting of all sorts of things. If you ask me.
All sorts of things, yeah. Well, living a spiritual life is about all sorts of things.
Yeah.
It's about everything.
I mean, I went in kind of without expectations, so I tried not to have so many, just to not get disappointed, and also where to pull the expectations from. I didn't know, But we ended up doing so many different things. That's why I had such a hard time trying before to make a video about it. For example, we did a lot of breath work. Can you maybe speak a bit on this, why it's such a powerful tool, really?
Well, the breath is really what connects our physical awareness to our mental awareness. It's a bridge. And many of us have, we could say, obstacles, either in our bodies because our bodies aren't fit or the energy channels aren't open, or in our minds. We have self-limiting beliefs. We have socially conditioned and constructed beliefs about who we are and what we're meant to do in the world. And when we activate the breath, we activate the purest part of life force. We activate oxygen in our body, and that starts to pull at the threads of all of this conditioning and all of this tightness we have in our being. And so when the body and the mind are in union, this is like consciousness and energy being in union. And so the breath is a very powerful tool that goes beyond ideas of how life force is meant to move through us and allows it to break things open. So this is why a lot of breath work.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Talking about this is such a different thing, and like to speak about my experience a bit. For me, especially the breath work was such a surprisingly powerful thing, where I really had a transformational moments where totally my perception of some things shifted, and I'm so grateful for this. And even now when you speak about it, it's a little bit out there, or I have a hard time like giving substance to this. But really, from my experience, I'm so happy that I got to try it, and you pushed us through there.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons this is one of the reasons I like to offer these long experiential workshops, because talking about it is trying to understand reality with the mind. And we've been trying to do that for thousands of years in thousands of different ways. And ultimately no philosopher has ever been able to master it. We can live it more easily than we can think it or talk about it. And that leaves us in this medium a little bit lost, which is the way it is.
It is the way it is.
But this thing experiences things differently than this thing does.
Yeah. Something we did, and that was also very powerful for me right in the beginning. The first week, every morning, we did the Osho dynamic meditation, which for people who don't know means first 10 minutes of power breathing, fire breath. Then
deep, chaotic and fast breathing.
Yeah, with the eyes closed on a yoga mat. Then with the arms up. No, not yet. Okay,
the Osho dynamic meditation happens in 5 stages. The first one is deep, chaotic breath, where you focus on the exhale. The second is catharsis, or completely consciously going mad.
This part,
It's letting out from your body all the repressed bullshit that you've allowed yourself to live with for as many weeks and days as there are.
Imagine a room of 18 people with their eyes closed on yoga mats going totally nuts. It's from the outside must look like a madhouse.
Yeah, it's a madhouse.
We actually had to move this exercise back in the day because the neighbors were
a little bit.
We were too loud, let's say, or people were just so into it. But yeah, okay.
And then is a phase where you're jumping up and down, and you're letting your heels hit the floor, and you're shouting the mantra "Hu, hu, hu." And this is about coming from the hara and allowing the voice to come from the hara and stimulating the lower energy centers of the body, the animal part of the body, to lift the energy up. It's also designed to support you to understand that the mind sets particular limits for you that the body can exceed. Because to jump up and down for 10 minutes seems easy enough, but when you're in the middle of it, 100 times you want to collapse and say, I'm finished. But if you keep going and you exhaust yourself, the mind thinks it's time for it to stop, but the body can keep going. And this is part of the lesson. Yeah. And then there's a moment of stillness, or 15 minutes of stillness, where you freeze.
With your arms still up.
With your arms still up in the air. Yes, this is true. And in this, you're cultivating the witness to watch, because by this time there are many emotions have come up, many feelings have arisen. And this is where we can train the consciousness to see them without identifying with them. Because when we allow ourselves to move with our emotions, we start to identify with them. In this stillness, we can see them and let them be. And then the last phase is to celebrate.
It's so true, though, that how these emotions come up. I was on day one. I mean, we had a question going into this. So, what is between me and total liberation, or something like this? So I was pondering this every once in a while, but I was jumping and crying. Like, this was my experience, and it's again kind of hard for me as a mental person a bit.
Yeah, we noticed Moritz is a very mental person.
So for me it was kind of hard to no, it was okay to accept, but I was surprised, let's say like this, how powerful this was and how actually the emotions were released in this exercise.
Well, modern science has proven, but it's also a sort of tantric understanding, but modern science has proven that what happens in a socialized human experience is that there are certain social conditions to the way that we live. And when we live with these conditions, we often swallow what we need to complete something. An animal, if you hit it with a car, will shake and move and freak out, and release all of the emotion. A human, if you hit it with a car, will try to stand up and be, I'm fine, I'm okay, everything's fine. Because we are conditioned to make this mask of being okay and being proper in the world. And when we swallow emotions, whether it's the emotion you feel when you stub your toe or when your girlfriend breaks your heart and you want to be strong and appear like you're a very strong man who knows how to handle his emotions, inside you're dying. And these types of cathartic techniques support us to complete the incomplete movements that are trapped in our muscle tissue. And this eventually leads to a more liberated way of being, because we're not busy stuffing ourselves full of stuff that's from the past. Our bodies hold on to the past. Even to the point now that they've proven we hold on to the trauma of our previous generations.
Yeah, that's...
I think they call it ethnogenics or something like this. Wow. So that the DNA can transfer highly traumatic experiences into the next generation.
Yeah, so, well, I felt that. Like I say, a very emotional beginning of this whole time. Maybe just to round up, there was then it's celebration already, where we just dance.
Yeah, then you're celebrating.
After finally the arms go down and we can just dance.
And celebrate the coming of the day and also the release. Celebrating this purification. It's ultimately a biological, bioenergetic purification that this technique allows people to go through, which gives space for new patterns to develop or new ways of being, because once you purify or empty something, then you can refill it. But if the cup stays full of all this crap from the past, there's no space to put anything new in.
Nice.
Yeah, because then we reframe, we try to do positive affirmation on stuff, on something that's so full it can't receive anything new.
Yeah. So that was I mean, we can only pick out a few things now, but every morning in the first week we did this meditation, very nice. The breath work was very powerful for me. Maybe you as the one who put this together, what's some things that are important for you to give to us in this retreat?
Each week is a different cycle with a different theme. And in the first week we're looking at ourselves and our connection to our source, to purify and repattern this relationship. So this is our parents, all of the psychology of how we came to develop the ego shell that we became to develop, so we can have more awareness over it, around it, and we can step into new ways of being. So first we unwind the core conditionings of a person and give them an opportunity to connect with their higher self, rather than connect through their parents or through their church or through their school to their higher self. We cleanse not only the physical part, but we start to look at how can we cleanse the belief systems of these patterns that actually maybe don't serve us. They were given to us with love and with a desire for us to be healthy people, but some of them were just really were toxic. And
to bring an example, maybe again, for me, I remember now perfectly the one example, that belief sentence that I realized for the first time maybe so much, was that I have this expectation to be perfect, or this kind of striving to be perfect, and to have a shift happening there was maybe one of the most powerful shifts or transformations that happened to me in this 3 weeks.
Because the first week is foundational because we start to look at core beliefs,
and
core holding and core wounding. And so when one believes, or I used to believe it also, that I have to be perfect to be loved, I don't give myself a lot of space to learn from my mistakes. I don't give myself much space to grow because already I have this expectation that what is now must be perfect.
Yeah.
And it's hard to love oneself if one expects oneself to be perfect.
It is. And then even more twisted, the more I feel like I have a good intellectual understanding of what does it mean to be perfect, the more I have a certain way to be, in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no freedom in that. There's no liberation in that.
That's intense. And I'm so glad at least, let's say I started the process of integrating a new perspective there.
On that theme, I really like to talk about the idea of being perfectly imperfect.
Yeah.
That
makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. My wounds and my idiosyncrasies actually create this particular part of magic that I have, and your wounds and your idiosyncrasies create also your biggest light and your biggest gift. No? No.
And then week 2.
Week 2. Lover and beloved. So here is where we get into the themes that the modern world thinks about Tantra as this dynamic between partners. Usually men and women, not always. There is a whole big community of people that choose same-sex partnerships, but normally people are talking about this from a man-woman perspective, polarity. And once we, have a healthier relationship to ourselves, this is primary. Most of us try to connect with somebody else when we have this completely obscure, poor idea of who we are, and then we want somebody else to fulfill the other half of what we aren't. This is why we do the work on ourselves first, for the first week. And then we start to look at...
And then after week 1 we are healed and on the
yeah, sure.
on the individual level, and then we can move on.
After week 1 we are more aware on the individual level, and it becomes interesting to look at how we connect from a place of higher awareness and higher openness. I make no promises that after 3 weeks you're healed forever. This is no snake oil here, But here, when we understand how the ego ticks and what makes us tick, and some of our ego's identifications are, we can start to see somebody else more clearly as not the thing to fill the hole. So in the second week, we're looking at how can we communicate more clearly, how can we connect more clearly from a place of imperfected perfection, and how can we understand how we try to hook each other. Every ego pattern has hooks. And I would say the most important part of week 2, as much as we might look at sexual healing and sexual energy and the movement of all of this and conscious communication skills, the most important part that will help us have healthy relationships is to understand how we try to get our needs met from other people and what bait we throw out so that we can capture them. Because when we understand what our ego has been missing, we can have less expectation that the other fill it and more responsibility for ourselves. And we can catch ourselves in these patterns. These patterns show up in sex. They show up in communication. They show up in co-creation. Even though this week is called Lover and Beloved, and we work with sexual healing and we work with sexually de-armoring the body, which is a physical technique, where all of these relationships, one-on-one relationships, happen with all of our friends as well. They happen between us and our parents. They happen between us and our co-workers. Our ego wants something to hold on to. And if we can become more aware of that hook and let it go, we're again more liberated in the connection.
And one thing you mentioned now that for me sticks out, or where I also had a moment of insight, or I really took something away, let's say, was this communicating more clearly. And I have in particular one exercise in mind where We were the name was Desires, Fears, and Boundaries, I would say, where we practice communicating our desires and the fears that surround this desire, and then the boundaries that we have concerning it, or also our own limitations around it. And this totally applies to, like you say, not just a sexual partner or lover, but also in general any situation. I already just practiced this actually. I had to borrow money from a friend here now, and I didn't want to go and just be like, can you borrow me this amount, because I realized I was gonna ask for like quite the amount, because I lost my credit card again. So I need some more money. Right. So I went to her and I said, so my desire is to have enough money until I leave Guatemala, which is, when I calculate, 200 euro, let's say. I realize it's a lot of money, so my fear is that it's too much to ask for and that you feel uncomfortable but also under pressure to accept my question. And my boundary is that I want to accept where you are in this, and I want to make a nice agreement on how I pay back the money. And so I went to her with this way of communicating it, and it was very clear for her, also inviting a no in a way, for giving her absolutely easy way to say no or give her terms on this. And yeah, this is just one example. I had other situations during the retreat actually where we were using this, and I really take this away as a powerful tool. Super powerful. To become clear also first for myself, what do I actually want, what's my desire, and where are my fears around this. Yeah, communication models can be a little bit restrictive at first because it feels like one is trying to fit themselves into a model, and there's a couple of them. This Desires, Fears, and Boundaries comes from the work of sky dancing, Tantra in particular. And there's also nonviolent communication with Marshall Rosenberg. It's also a very good technique that asks you to ask questions of yourself first, before you communicate it with somebody else. What do I really want? What am I afraid of? One of the main questions, what do I want? What do I really want? Because sometimes I go to somebody and I expect them to fill in the blank of what do I want. And this is one of the ways that we talk about hooking. So when we come really clean in our own communication, when we've had time and use techniques that help us reflect on ourselves, we come as a whole being to another whole being, and we give them space to respond to the truth of what is with us. Yeah. Most of us are locked into communication patterns where we're trying to get something out of someone else. So we wouldn't want to say, I'm afraid that you will say no, because we wouldn't want to give them that much space. So this forces us to be open. These kinds of techniques can force us to be, take responsibility for ourselves. And, I mean, it sounds so trivial in a way, but to really have a conscious awareness process behind it and then practice a bit was great. Yeah, and the more you practice these kinds of things, it's a very, it's a mental process, but the more you practice these kinds of things, the more fluid it becomes. Yeah. It no longer has to feel like it's coming like, hello, I am a robot, coming to you with a robot communication methodology. But over time it begins to flow, it just becomes a part of our natural way of being the more we practice responsible communication. So this is, part of week 2. Part of week 2. Yeah, maybe we move on. I mean, I talk a little bit about the sexuality piece, because it is such a sexual, there is so much wrapped up around Tantra and sex in our modern paradigm. And let's talk a bit about the chakras and the energy, because this was something completely new for me. And something also where I think the curiosity lies for many people around this. Okay, the chakras and the energy. I'll talk about the energy exchange. Well, like you want, but just I have this exercise in mind where we were sitting across from each other, sharing, breathing together, and there you go. Yeah. So that is a classic kind of tantric. Once we begin to learn how to breathe fully in ourselves, to actually consciously choose to share our breath. Most people, when they meet intimately, sexually, physically, even in contact dance on the dance floor, we're
talking at or breathing at or being with ourselves. And in American English they talk about bumping uglies as a term for sex. Yeah, we're just bumping around, bumbling around. When we can bring consciousness to the amount of energy that sexuality brings, we can actually channel, like be aware that I'm actually connecting to you on a level that's up in the body, but it's also so much more profound than that. But this takes some awareness. When sexual energy rises, most people become quite unconscious.
The animal.
The animal takes over. Yeah, and we love the animal. I'm not about trying to destroy the animal, but it's like, how can I?
No, she's not.
No, far from it. If anything, I probably lean too much into the animal myself, still. But when we can really like be aware of this animal and sort of like, you know, tame it a little bit, and set it wild sometimes is also fine, but when we can tame it a little bit and when we can actually connect to someone, we can do more than make love in our bodies, do more than have intercourse, do more than have sex. Although we may be having sex while we're doing it, if our breath is connected and we're actually taking each other's energetic beings in, we're having a union that is so much more profound. I think one of my favorite exercises from the second week is when we call out somebody's most beautiful quality that we see.
Yeah, this was beautiful.
It's a beautiful exercise. You know, in Moritz, I see his, I don't know what to say right now. No, but I see his childlike innocence and wonder, and also depth of mature curiosity. So there's this kind of, I would call him a curious cat in a way. This one that wants to know, is a beautiful quality. And in me, who knows?
I see fire and wildness.
Right, okay. And so we have these qualities that maybe he's not so fiery and wild, and maybe I can be a little rigid and not so curious. And if I'm in my wildness and he is in his curiosity, and we can share our breath, we can share this quality. And this is the kind of lovemaking we can have, where we stay whole in ourselves and share what we have in abundance. Not in a way of hooking from the other or taking from the other, but allowing them to offer it to us as a gift of their abundance. And then when we breathe consciously, which we can do when we make love, which involves a few steps that I don't think is appropriate, or it's fine to go through here, it's just too complicated. But when we consciously can breathe into the different centers of our body, we are actually having a meeting. Most sexual encounters are not a meeting with the other. They're a meeting with our own sexual energy bumping up against another human body.
Word.
And so when we do this kind of, in the first week, we're also already practicing this breathing technique. And then when we begin to share it, we can see just through the eye contact that there's an actual seeing of each other and a being together. And then if we use this same kind of breathing technique when we're actually in a sexual union, if we can stay conscious enough, which is a big order actually for most of us, then we can have this kind of real depth of sharing from our animal self, from our nurturing self, from our power lion self, from our loving, gentle self, from our truth, from our vision, and from our connection to spirit. And then we can have this big bridge that is so much more expanded, and our lovemaking becomes something that transcends and includes the body and the animal. And that's where the tantric sexuality is pointing us, is how can we live in our bodies this feeling of oneness, of no separation.
Yeah, what a task.
What a task, yeah. So that's week 2, is trying to do this with one other person.
Yeah, beautiful exercise.
Yeah.
I feel like staying there for just a short moment, because one thing that also sparked my curiosity to actually come to this retreat was talking with other people and learning how many different ways of orgasm there are for a man that I never realized, and that kind of when I listened to some people speak about their sexual encounters, it felt like I felt like, okay, wow, I never had sex yet. Kind of. I don't want to say that. Like I'm happy with my sex life, but it seems like there's a different quality entering the space.
Well, when we bring more consciousness, there is a different quality. When we bring the consciousness, remember I've been talking about Tantra the whole time as this energy meets consciousness. Most of us, when we're in our sexuality, are purely in our energy and not so much in our consciousness. And when we talk about the different kinds of male orgasm, there is, I tend to stay away from creating lots of labels and expectations, because I think in some schools when we do the deconditioning work that we talked about in the first week of who am I supposed to be and how is it supposed to be, when we start to create new rules and new labels, we're not necessarily serving anybody to live freely. So in many schools they talk about the male orgasm. The ultimate orgasm for a man is to have a full-blown body orgasm without ejaculating. Right, because then we can keep our seed. And somehow, for some schools, longevity seems to be the most important part. I'm a little less worried about longevity and more about the fullness of life in any given moment, because you could live for 150 years but only live at half your capacity. I'd rather live 80 years at 100% my capacity than worry about, Nonetheless, it is true that through these kinds of techniques and through cultivating consciousness with awareness and certain locking of certain muscles in the body, we can support people to have a more expanded orgasmic experience, both men and women. A less tension-based, more fluid, more open orgasmic experience that lends itself to a kind of how could our relationship be with life? Could we be relaxed and expanded and allowing at life as in body and spirit connected? Could we be more fluid in our existence and less tense? You know, most of us before we have an orgasm, the whole body tenses up a bit and then we make this funny face. And which is and I think this idea of cultivating a more relaxed orgasmic experience can transcend into other parts of our lives. We're living in a kind of, one of my teachers talks about the anti-ecstatic conspiracy we live in, that we wouldn't want to be too joyful or too blissful. One of the things that I caution against is when I see people often doing these practices that have everything to do about sex and they're not bringing them to the rest of their lives, that it can potentially become more of just a hedonistic experiment. I appreciate hedonism, but when it comes to my practice of being the human that I came here to be, I'm interested in my orgasm as much as I'm interested in all the other things I can create in the world. So, the techniques that you learned are the techniques that will take you to towards a more relaxed orgasmic experience, towards a more expanded orgasmic experience. But to get into this idea that not ejaculating as a man is the ultimate goal of tantric sex, I have seen this damage so many men's sexual experience, because then it becomes an exercise of control. Because in order to succeed, rather than relax and open to more pleasure, men contract around it. And they start holding things back so they can be the successful man that doesn't ejaculate when he has an orgasm. Yeah. And this is, so I don't pound it too hard. No pun intended there. I don't focus on that as the most ultimate expression of tantric mastery.
Yeah.
Because it is just one very important, our sex is a very important part of most of our lives, but it is just one piece of our life. And if I narrowed Tantra down to giving men the opportunity to have a non-ejaculatory orgasm, I think I'd be oversimplifying things. Just
yeah, okay, thank you for this answer. I mean, I wasn't even so much pointing to this no ejaculation. I mean, I don't know, it was a pretty open question, and we didn't speak so much about this actually in the course, so it's kind of surprise question also.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Just came to me. But yeah, let's move on maybe to week 3.
Okay, yep. In week 3, we look at the theme of community and collective consciousness. And this is a week that is actually, I've studied with teachers that taught me how to do deconditioning with people and how to support people to be more open in their bodies. And I've done a lot of work with my teachers around this community, I mean this lover-beloved piece, but the community and collective consciousness piece is something for me that's still an evolving piece of where humanity wants to head. In the Tantra sort of history, they talk about the Sangha, which is the community of people on the spiritual journey together. How can we cultivate a healthy connection between groups of people when we live in a very individuated society is a question it's hard to articulate. But some of the threads that have pulled around that is that we have a hard time even walking together in a line, or breathing together, or making shapes together, and our ego gets involved in our connection with the whole community at large. So, and the way that I notice that happens mostly in terms of the community piece is that we're responding to things we learned in our adolescence and young adulthood about how we relate to the outside world. How do we relate to our peers, and what are our insecurities around our peers? This is a key piece. And how do we relate to authority? And how do we relate to our concept of the ultimate authority, which is God, life, existence? Do we reject it, or what can we accept from it? And inside of this comes, what is my fucking reason for being here? Because if I'm not at peace with my purpose, I have a hard time being at peace with everything that's happening around me. And so in this week, we kind of, we open up to the magic of each person's experience while we trigger some things working together in groups, and how do we stay spontaneous in groups. It's a work that's still unfolding for me, to be honest, and each time I do the Tantric Way, it looks different. Although I'm pulling on the same themes, it's looking different every time how it comes through. But in the end, hopefully everybody comes out with a little sense of what facet of themselves could they be cultivating more to feel more like they're living their liberated self.
Yeah, I'm gonna make a movie.
You're gonna make a movie, exactly. You're gonna make a movie.
That came out of this one for me.
Yeah.
Actually, with a commitment, and it's not a movie. I mean, I've been making videos for a long time now, but actually a movie. I'm writing a script, and the first draft should be ready. I'm gonna repeat this commitment now.
Okay, live on air.
We'll be ready by the end of June. I will send it to my friend Esther, and then we'll move forward from there. And I'm pretty excited. I have the concept kind of going, and yeah, but no, this is my example, and everybody had their own thing that where they put their attention or more clarity around like the path through life. Actually, in the past week, I've already, from the people that we were doing this with, heard so life-changing moments. One is moving, and the other one quit their job, and so
yeah, I tend to have that effect on people.
I don't want to say this retreat makes people quit their jobs.
No.
Like, people come out of this with some more clarity maybe about what they want from life, or where they want to put more focus, and then maybe this is something that was overdue for her anyway.
Exactly, and I think it's important especially when we talk about purpose in a world that's so driven and so goal oriented, that there's a distinction between, although your purpose is drawing you to do this film, which gave you a goal, the idea is that we can meet that purpose with a spark of interest and not a spark of goal orientation. Right? And for some people, they may come out and decide, yes, I'm going to quit my job because I want to take care of myself better. I've learned that I'm actually giving myself away to my boss when what I need to be fulfilled is more time for myself. Some people have come out of the group with a complete understanding that actually, instead of judging myself for exploring, I'm going to rest in the fact that I don't know what I want. And I'm going to give that to myself. So just to articulate that, really the idea being that people can step out of it with a really solid sense of how they can take care of themselves next to give their biggest gift. And sometimes that's about stopping doing things. And sometimes it's about stepping into doing things, and not to have an idea that our purpose has to be important. I mean, and because, you know, I remember one of your beliefs is that you have to save the world, yeah?
That was one.
And now you can make a movie not to save the world, but just because it makes you feel good to offer it. Hopefully.
Well, and I'm not doing it to save the world also.
Right, exactly.
Well, I don't have this on my shoulder
anymore,
doing that.
yeah.
I'm more free, and I'm allowing myself to be imperfect. That's like such a takeaway. Yeah, it's really nice. So my script is not going to be perfect.
Good. And this interview isn't perfect. And
it's not.
And it's perfectly imperfect that we can do this way. Yeah.
Very nice. And one thing I would like to at least get to here is the transformational circle, as this powerful tool of showing ourselves and seeing each other in vulnerable spots. So just some practical things. We're sitting in a circle in this group. Gaia is facilitating, holding the space, and the question is, who has something to share, who has tension, wants to speak up. And then magic happens. I mean, if anything, like, Tantra is a bit about magic and it's a bit about trust. But I think the transformation circle is ultimately, very simply put, it's a kind of group therapy that's happening in these spaces. And I'm facilitating this for people. One of the reasons for this is that each of us is living our own individual lives, but we're all experiencing so many of the same things. And so if somebody's personal lock or block is one particular piece that they're holding the strongest, we can bring them into the circle. They can expose this block. They can bring more awareness to where they feel locked or where they feel resistant, or, you know, maybe their resistance is to speaking out how amazing they feel. Many of us are afraid to talk about how perfect their lives are, or how fine everything is. But mostly we focus on problems. And we all recognize, in this human experience, there are issues that we all face at some point in our lives. There's like a humanistic kind of reality that some people maybe have one facet more expanded than the other. But when I watch you deal with when I walk you through your journey about this need to be perfect that you picked up from your conditioning, which is a very common German conditioning, by the way. It's like a cultural conditioning in the German field that I'm aware of. But when I watch you walk through that, and the other participants watch you walk through that, they also have the lived experience of transforming that for themselves. Because as they witness you have that experience, they give that gift back to themselves. And then when the other person who steps into the circle that works with their issues of codependency and giving themselves away to their partner and sort of not standing up for their own needs and giving themselves away, each of us has a piece of ourselves that will do that. And then in this magic of working with each individual, everybody gets to learn from everybody's lessons.
And in these experiences, I'm basically trying to support people to become more aware of their own patterns and what they're rooted in, to expose those patterns, because the things that we hide inside ourselves have more power over us than anything else. And then to hopefully create an experience such that the person has a lived moment of breaking that pattern. And when somebody has a lived moment of breaking that pattern, it sits in their experience bank. It's no longer just an idea. And when it's no longer just an idea, but it's something I've lived once before, when I go out into the world, the possibility that I could live it is so much greater than if I just dissected it with my brain. But if I let the energy live it.
Yeah, so powerful.
Yeah, and it's hard to describe.
It's hard to describe. You gotta experience this.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I talked on my channel about the forum in Tamera before, and it's a similar space where this kind of transformation happens, and where also this witnessing part, which is so powerful. Just for me to sit in this circle and see the other people going in their vulnerable spots many times and showing themselves like this. There's so much compassion coming up, and there's so much trust created, because they allow themselves to be vulnerable in this space and make themselves transparent. That creates such a true contact between me and whoever's in the middle.
Yeah. And it's not just compassion for the others, it's compassion for oneself, I think, that we cultivate as well. Because when we see somebody else be vulnerable about something that maybe we wouldn't dare to say, suddenly, and the things we judge ourselves for, and then suddenly somebody else opens up the same book and we can love them through it, then our capacity to love ourselves through that same closure increases so much.
And so many times whatever is shared in the middle I can relate to. I know in a different version, or exactly the same, or it's really powerful.
Because we're all living the hero's journey, if you will. We're all living this, this life stream. And maybe the lessons come up different for each of us, but really we're all, I mean, sadly for those of us with big egos, and I mean us, myself, but sadly we're all really experiencing, no matter what our background, no matter what our color, no matter what our socioeconomic status, no matter all of these things, there's a lived experience in being a human that's undeniably shared by all of us, even though from the outside it may look completely different. And this circle counts on that. It knows that. And like you said, when you're sitting on the side, it's like, oh, there I go again. Oh, there I go again. And then I becomes all of us. And then my sense of I begins to expand beyond my skin. And actually the word Tantra means to weave and to expand, ultimately. So coming back to the meaning of the word Tantra.
Yeah, interesting.
That when we weave this story and we see how we're all interwoven in this story together, that sense of who am I? I'm all of these people.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Now thunder is rolling in.
And the volcano's been made naked. She's exposed herself for us, which I like.
What else is there to say? Maybe where can we, if people are curious, where can they find out more?
Where can they find out more? They can go to Gaia Gasm. That's GAIAGASM.com.
Yeah, I'll put it in.
You put it in. And then, I don't know, I offer this workshop twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year, always in Nicaragua at Ometepe, at a place called Inanita. And then it looks like Italy this June.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Coming to Europe.
Nice.
Nice, yeah.
And Inanita to say also, if you feel like it, a few words maybe?
Inanita is a spiritual, it's the actual terminology is an earth-based spiritual community. It's an exploration and an experiment in community living. It's outrageously ecological, because I also understand that my I doesn't just include you, but it includes the rocks we're sitting on in the volcano. around us. So Inanita is on the island of Ometepe in Nicaragua, and there we eat all local food, and we make meditations every day, and we make celebrations, and it's a continuous exploration of the work that the Tantric Way has, but it's like long form, spread out.
Yeah, I want to go.
Yeah, I want you to come and visit.
Gaia founded this place.
Yes,
just to say this too.
It's co-founded by myself and another man. I'm there from August 15th until February 15th each year. And Paul Mai is there from February 15th to August 15th of each year.
Right on. Maybe I see some of you there at some point.
Or along the Tantric Way.
Yeah, so much for now. Do you have anything else to add?
I love you.
I love you too.
And I love you.
I love you too. Thank you, Gaia.
Thank you.
Okay. Ciao,
Ciao.
everybody. All right.
All right. Cut.